What's up guys, it's National Master Dem Apples here, back with another video, and today we're going to be taking a look at another game from the candidates, the game between Hikaru Nakamura and Fabiano Caruana. And just to let you know, this was a decisive game, meaning that there was a winner and a loser, so let's get right into it. Pawn to e4, pawn e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. We have a Ruy Lopez. I mean, this is really common at this kind of level, as well as like some d4 queen's gambit stuff. But, you know, pawn a6 is played. This is the Morphy defense. It's like, I don't know, it's a really common move. And usually people go bishop a4, bishop c6 is a perfectly playable option, the exchange variation. But knight f6 is played, and so it looks like we're going to have a pretty normal Ruy Lopez. Pawn d3 is played to protect the pawn on e4. Bishop c5, again a common motif in these positions. Black usually tries to go b5 and d5 and just get really active, and a lot of times sacrifices the pawn on e5 for activity. But here we have castles, pawn d6, pawn c3, and castles, rook e1. You know, both sides playing it really slowly and methodically. White's usual plan is to go knight d2, knight f1, and bring the knight to g3 or e3. Now, why would white do this? Well, the thing is, like a knight on e3 or g3 would hop into f5 or d5 really easily. In some cases, h5. So, in king's pawn openings like e4, e5, the squares f5 and d5 are often pretty weak and are exploitable. Note that Hikaru played c3 so that he can bring his bishop to c2, and to prevent his opponent's knight from ever harassing him. We have knight e7. Again, black is trying to do the same thing, reroute the knight to f4, knight bd2, and knight g6, knight f1, just some knight shuffling, and now pawn to d5. Now, I'm not sure if this is theory or prep or anything, but Caruana is making a break in the center, and this needs to be responded to. Pawn takes d5 is pretty much the only move. I mean, if you don't do anything, black is going to take. And after you take back, say, I don't know, a3, he takes here, and you're in trouble. And you also lost a pawn. So this is a kind of a no-no. White is pretty much forced to take. Bishop e3 is also an option, but not really a good one either. Takes, knight takes. It's also possible to take with the queen. To me, this looks more natural, centralizing it, but it's not that great, actually. After a move, let's say, like bishop e3, or bishop b3, or pawn d4, the queen proves to be a bit vulnerable on d5. So, knight takes d5 is played, and you might say, well, this gives up the pawn. And Hikaru does not take the pawn. Now, let's see what happens if white takes the pawn. There's this funny little line here. Bishop takes f2, check. This is a fork, so white does have to take. And after this nice move, knight takes e5, white is unable to take back with the rook, because after he takes back with the rook, there is a queen check on f6, which will win the rook and some material. So after this, like, white has to go king g1, and after, like, well, black is probably going to move his knight back. He can go bishop g4 as well. He has multiple choices. Knight g6, it seems like queen d6, all of these are possible options, but the point is clear, right? Black gave up the bishop pair, but he got a pawn in the middle, and white's king is now somewhat exposed. Like, f2 could be a huge weakness. And so, no, this is an imbalanced position, but Hikaru seemingly did not want to go for this position, because I don't know what he wanted, but he played bishop to b3, hitting the knight, and, you know, just maintaining some annoying pressure. This pawn is still up for grabs, by the way. Pawn c6, still up for grabs, and d4. Again, Hikaru could have taken again, but, like, this would have resulted in the same tactic, and virtually the same position, I guess, after king to g1. Like, you know, I mean, there's not much to be said here. Black still has some activity, but now with this pawn on c6 reinforcing the knight on d5, there could be some ideas of queen b6 check on the way. So, I'd say black has benefited from this series of moves. So we have pawn d4 striking in the center, and this to me seems like liquidation. It seems to me like Hikaru wants to simplify the position. Not draw per se. Hikaru is a really good fighter. He just plays on equal positions, but he doesn't seem like he wants an immediate crazy conflict. So we have pawn takes pawn, not much of a choice. Knight takes pawn. Note that Hikaru does not take with the c pawn, giving himself an isolated pawn for absolutely no reason. Black would just sit back and target this the entire game. So, crucial thing to note, Hikaru takes back with the knight, so if black ever takes, he can take back with the queen. And right after I say that, knight f6 is played, and h3. H3 is an interesting move. This is just prophylaxis against knight g4 and bishop g4, and it's probably the safest move. I wonder why he didn't just develop the bishop. After h6, bishop e3, knight g4. I think Hikaru was looking for a sort of calm position, as we saw, because he didn't grab the pawn. And so this kind of imbalance and this tension may not have been to his liking. After knight g3 takes, this is possible. I mean, it's not necessarily what has to happen in the game, but it's definitely an option for black to grab the bishop pair. But white definitely has some compensation. His rook might go to d3 to attack the queen, and the knight might go to f5. So this is not that bad for white. Instead, we have pawn h3, preventing all knight g4 and bishop g4 shenanigans altogether. But this does introduce a bad thing for white. After takes, white did get saddled with an isolated d-pawn, which can be a target. Note that Hikaru could have taken with the queen, but after takes, I feel like this would be a slightly better version of it for black, because he can go rook d8 right away to pressure the pawn. And, okay, well, you might say is bishop g5 or, whatever, but it's okay. Black might just straight up win this pawn. So, Hikaru takes with the pawn, and there is a principle in isolated queen's pawns positions. If you're the guy without the pawn, say, you're trying to attack this pawn, usually you want to exchange minor pieces. That are the knights and bishops. You want to leave your major pieces on the board. So, these guys are going to try to just put pressure on this, and at the right moment, c5 is going to be played, and black is going to win the pawn. What do you want to do if you're the guy with the pieces? Well, with the pawn. Well, you want to keep your pieces on the board, so you want to keep your minor pieces, and ideally, you also want to keep your major pieces, just in case, So, throughout this game, because Hikaru has the isolated pawn, he is going to be trying to keep pieces on the board as much as possible. We have knight to d5. Again, a common idea in isolated queen's pawns positions is to blockade the pawn. This is exactly what Caruana is doing, but moreover, he kind of wants to go bishop e6 and also wrest the control of this diagonal or induce some sort of trade on e6, which, as we said, benefits the guy playing against the pawn. We have bishop to c2. Hikaru not interested in trading and instead trying to put pressure on this diagonal. Bishop e6 is played, knight g3, trying to hop into possibly f5 or e4, and now we have knight f4, trying to tempt Hikaru into exchanging more pieces, which is not a bad move, but Hikaru goes rook to e4. Again, bishop f4 is not a bad move, but principally, it's not I don't know, it doesn't feel right to give black a free exchange. Not exchange as in a rook for a minor piece, but an exchange in, exchanges benefit the guy playing against your isolated queen's pawn, because you have, more space. You have the bishop pair. It makes sense that you don't want to give it up that easily. So rook to e4 is played, trying to kick the knight out. Knight goes back to d5, and pawn to a3. This is a slightly suspicious move, I'd say. Hikaru later plays bishop d2 to simply develop the bishop, and the only point of a3 I see is to prevent knight to b4, which could be annoying, because white would have to go bishop b1 to not trade pieces. But with bishop d2, you control b4 anyway, so I don't see why a3 was necessary. But a3, it's not a bad move either. Rook to e8, bishop d2, see what I mean? Okay. Knight f6. I'm not quite sure why Fabiano played this move. I saw in a Russian chess book that, eventually you want to lay siege and stop blockading this pawn. You want to like actually attack it with your pieces, but this is not the right way to approach it, it seems. You are just removing a knight that was doing a good job, and you're not even completely developed yet. Although it is not a huge mistake, I mean, but the computer seems to like something like queen b6 just developing and applying some pressure. And, you know, to be honest, black has a slight pull here. You know, white's pawns are really weak. His rook is kind of clumsy on e4, and his bishop is blocked by his rook as well. But at any rate, this was not played in the game. Knight f6 was played, and now a really nice move, bishop g5. Hikaru did not want to move his rook, or else his d-pawn would fall, and it's not game over. White definitely has chances here after bishop g5, but white is definitely not playing an advantage because he's down a pawn, quite simply. I mean, black can just take and go knight d5 and say, ha, I'm up a pawn, I will never lose this game, especially at this 2700 plus level. So, you know, this is not played, and bishop g5 is a really nice move, pinning the knight so that he cannot win the rook, and it protects this pawn. So, pawn h6 is played, a really nice move. I mean, now Hikaru is essentially forced into exchanging, or else he will lose his rook. So takes, and now queen to d2, just developing his queen. But as you can see, Fabiano has succeeded, right? He's exchanged one pair of minor pieces, and seems to have a slight pull because of the isolated pawn, which is becoming weaker and weaker. So Hikaru needs to prove something for this. Queen g5, I think this is the wrong idea, though. He's hoping that Hikaru will play queen takes g5 and h takes g5. But to be honest, I mean, this is good for black, actually. Knight f4 is coming, it's pretty strong, and, you know, black has sort of created an artificial outpost. But the idea of exchanging queens is kind of right, I guess. Exchanging pieces is good for the guy with the playing against the isolated pawn, but also keeping major pieces is also a good idea. Rook e3, I found this to be a really interesting move. So I thought like queen c3 would be much more natural, but black gets this scary attack. So bishop d5 is an option. Actually, sorry, bishop d5 is not an option because of rook g4, and all of a sudden white's attack is like coming through, right, on g6. But h5 is a strong move, preparing like h4 and some knight f4 stuff. And if white goes rook e1, say, like h4, knight f1, knight f4, and this is honestly looking a bit scary for white. And it becomes clear that like the best move is queen f3, but your queen is misplaced. Right, so it seems like Hikaru wanted to keep his queen on this side of the board with rook to e3. Knight f4 is played, and taking advantage of Hikaru's last move, which lost control of f4, Fabiano jumps in right away and says, look at your kingside weaknesses. Like, if you're not careful, like, the highlighted plan would actually happen, right? h5, h4, and all of a sudden, white is in some deep trouble. So, Hikaru has to do something quick, and he plays h4. I honestly think this deserves an exclamation mark. The computer didn't think so, but I really like this move. So the point is black has to move his queen, and if white goes h4, well, black can't ever go h4 himself. So what happens, I thought, like, if queen d5 was played, but what if he takes this pawn? Well, it turns out the computer initially hates this for white, but the more it thinks about it, the more it actually likes this. So rook e4 is the only option, right? Attacking the knight, it's pinned. You got one option, which is to go g5, protecting it. And after something simple like rook e1, rook d8, it becomes really apparent, and now that white has a big advantage because black's queen is straight up trapped after a move like bishop to d1. Knight f5 is going to come, like, black is essentially playing without a queen. His queen is trapped, right? Can't go on this diagonal. It's got, like, a few squares, right? But they're all covered. And in some time, like, white will try to get his pieces involved. Although it's not clear how white is going to get his pieces into the game without allowing black's queen back into the game as well. But at any rate, this seems pretty uncomfortable for black. I mean, the queen is just completely offsides. It feels like you're playing without a queen. Black has to go rook f8, by the way, which is not a good sign. Or else white would go knight f5 next move, trapping the queen, forcing black to take, and then he would win some material. So say b6, knight f5, take, 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 and white should win the game easily. So, queen d5 is played. Fabiano does not take the bait. Rook e4, forcing the knight back now. Knight g6, and now rook e1. Just simple development. Knight f8 is played. This seems like a suspicious move to me. Obviously, Fabiano was scared of h5 and he wanted to play prophylaxis. But he had a more active way to play prophylaxis. Rook a8, a simple development move, actually prevents h5 in a way. So h5, knight e7, and what Hikaru did in the game is that he went rook e5 and tried to do stuff. But rook e5, you can see, is not possible anymore because takes, right? And in some time, black is going to get his knight onto f5 or d5, and soon, your h-pawn is going to be a weakness. It's not really clear how black's going to break through. Now, you might wonder, what's the difference between this move and, when knight f8 happened? Well, rook e5 happened, and after h5, which is actually not a great move, bishop d7 was played. Again, the problem with this is that Fabiano's queen is just, kind of blocking everything. Everything's just on the back rank and super passive. Whereas in this position, right, rook e5, which is the main threat, and it just gains a lot of space, secures the f5 square for pieces, and it's just not there. And also, black is much more active. His pieces aren't just on the back rank. It looks similar, but it's not quite the same position. Now, h5 was not the greatest move by Hikaru. Now, I can't really explain why, but apparently h5 isn't great. It seems like Hikaru was scared about queen takes h4. He could have gone queen f4. This looks like a really natural move to me, bringing the queen closer to the king side. But the computer even likes rook e3 more, giving away the pawn, knight f5, and saying that you have an attack. Again, this is really hard to play with white. I mean, psychologically, I don't know why you do this, but I also don't know why Hikaru didn't go queen f4 either. This looks really natural, protecting the pawn. After h5, though, Fabiano blunders with bishop to d7. And now, as you can see, Fabiano's in full panic mode. He's just trying to exchange pieces, trying to mitigate Hikaru's attack. It's not working. Takes. I mean, what other option was there, really? Takes, and now knight to f5. And the bishop stopped guarding the square, and now the knight jumps in. And it seems like now we realize something has gone wrong. White has lots of nasty ideas, like queen f4, queen b4, and black's pieces all on the back rank are not really equipped to deal with this. Say queen f4, right? And this has multiple ideas. It has queen g4 ideas, queen g3, knight d6, knight e7, all sorts of moves. So there's just too much to calculate for Team Black here, and you have to play really precisely to not lose the game. In fact, there is a nasty threat here already. Say you do nothing, there's a move knight takes h6, which is a surprising immediate threat, but after g takes, the simple queen takes h6, and I was trying to find, okay, well, how does white win? But it's pretty simple, actually. White just makes a rook lift to g3, and black is toast. So, Fabiano has to deal with this threat. He plays queen to f6, defending his pawn. And note that Hikaru has been trying to avoid the exchange of minor pieces. He's been okay with exchanging a pair of rooks, though, because, that benefits him. Queen b4 is played, attacking the pawn on b7, and, possibly controlling e7 for a knight or a rook, and as well as d6, which a knight could also jump into. And now b5 is played. This is a huge no-no. Fabiano had one last chance to activate his pieces off of the back rank, and you can see that this will lead to his demise later. Yeah, b5 is not it. Bishop d7 apparently is it. And after queen takes, I don't know, this is really hard to play as a human, but sometimes, in these positions you have to calculate it. I mean, he only had 7 minutes left, but it's hard to fault him for making this kind of mistake. But bishop d7 is really it. And so, why bishop d7? Well, we'll say, just give an example, even though knight e7 is the best move, and you would have to calculate all this, and be like, oh, what if they take, and what if they do this? It's just what he had to do, because b5 loses on the spot. Say queen takes pawn, which looks very logical, winning a pawn. Bishop takes f5. If white takes here, you take here, and you got 2 pieces for a rook, and you should be doing alright, although you are not doing alright yet, and this is another thing you have to calculate after queen d6, but black is fine. He will probably have to give up this knight at some point, but he will be able to grab enough pawns in the meantime. So, again, this is too much to calculate, to be honest. Rook d8, bishop c2 takes, like, rook d1, queen f6, take. You have to win this endgame for white. This is probably lost for black in the long run, though. To be fair, there weren't many better options except for bishop d7. This is pretty much the only move, or else you allow queen takes b7. So Fabiano was like, well, I'm not going to give him my pawn, right? Something simple like rook b8 does not work due to a tactic that we will see in the game. After b5, there is knight to e7. You will be like, okay, patzer c check, patzer play check, right? No, Hikaru is not a patzer, and after knight d5, Fabiano resigned due to the double attack on his knight and his queen. He just can't defend everything. And this is just kind of a shocking blunder, but at the same time, like, this is just, I don't know. I feel like this was like a 1500 rated tactic, but at the same time, it's hard to see this knight just jumping backwards like this after giving like a patzer c check, patzer play check kind of move. But as we can see, this bishop on c2 ended up being the hero here because Hikaru refused to trade it earlier, protected it the entire game, just refusing to trade minor pieces, and now this happens. So yeah, it's a abrupt end to the game. Fabiano is going to lose something. If takes, this is actually checkmate because of the bishop. So, very nice game by Hikaru. And what are the takeaways from this kind of game, right? Well, it seems like Fabiano played a bit passively compared to like how he should have been playing. Like, always try to seek active defense, right? For some reason, it all started from here, I would argue. The momentum started shifting quickly. Like, he moved his knight back. He started going in full retreat after this. Like, okay, queen g5 and knight f4 steps forward, but then, everything just starts being forced back. Like, knight g6, and then the knight f8 was a strange move, to be honest. Always seek active defense if you can, if there's no reason to. Like, I mean, if I were you, like, I'd go knight f8 when I'm forced. Maybe that's why I'm not a grandmaster and I'm only a master. Like, prophylaxis is smart, but, like, why not rook d8? Okay. Knight f8 was weird, and now everything is just forced back. And when everything is forced back, things start to go wrong. Takes. And, yeah, every move was just backwards, and it doesn't seem like Fabiano ever got to really activate his pieces, while Hikaru did. And so, because he was so active, the isolated d-pawn didn't become much of a factor, and Hikaru was able to win the game off of a nice tactic. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye.